The cold had teeth that night. Ellie felt it through the thin wool of her serving dress, a garment never meant for winter, sewn from fabric so worn that the threads had begun to separate at the shoulders like a body slowly giving up. She carried a tray of silver goblets across the grand hall of Ashenvale Keep, each step measured, each breath controlled, because the one rule she had learned in 4 years of serving the nobility was this: do not be seen, be invisible, be useful, be gone before anyone remembers you were there. The hall was magnificent in its cruelty. Stone walls draped with tapestries of hunting wolves and conquering kings, chandeliers of iron and candlelight casting everything in amber and shadow. Long oak tables groaning under the weight of roasted pheasant, glazed boar, bread loaves the size of a man's torso, food that would feed Ellie's entire village for a week, consumed tonight by people who would not remember what they ate by morning. 100 guests filled the space with noise. Laughter, the scrape of chairs, the sharp percussion of goblets striking tables and toasts Ellie did not understand. Lords from the eastern provinces, ladies in gowns of deep burgundy and forest green, their necks heavy with silver and amber. Wolves, all of them, members of the most powerful packs in the Northern Territories, gathered here for the Alpha King's winter summit. Ellie was not a wolf. That was the first problem. She moved along the edge of the hall, keeping to the shadows between the torches, refilling goblets with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to make herself small. Her dark hair was pinned back tightly. Her hands were steady despite the cold creeping through the stone floor and up through the soles of her worn boots. She did not look at anyone directly. Eye contact was the second rule, or rather, the absence of it. Don't look. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't drop anything. She was almost to the far end of the table when Lord Fenwick's hand shot out. She didn't see it in time. His fingers closed around her wrist, meaty, rings biting into her skin, and he yanked her sideways with the casualness of a man redirecting a river. The tray tilted. 2 goblets slid and crashed to the stone floor, silver ringing against granite in a sound that cut through every conversation in the room like a blade. The silence lasted only half a second. Then the laughter started. "Careful, human," Fenwick said, his voice thick with wine and amusement. He was a broad man, silver-templed, with the satisfied expression of someone who had never been told no. "You nearly spilled on my coat. I apologize, my lord." Ellie set the tray down carefully on the table's edge. Her wrist ached where his fingers had gripped. She crouched to gather the fallen goblets, her face lowered, cheeks burning. "Leave them." He waved a hand dismissively. "Pour, and try not to tremble. It's irritating." She reached for the wine pitcher. Her hands were, in fact, trembling. Not from fear, she told herself, but from the cold. She poured. A clean pour, steady, professional. She had poured 10,000 cups. She knew how to do this. "Where did they find you?" Fenwick asked, not to her, but to the man seated beside him. Lord Brennan, younger, with a wolf's amber eyes and a smirk that suggested he found everything slightly beneath him. "Humans at the summit. It's absurd." "Head steward's choice," Brennan said, reaching past Ellie to grab the bread without acknowledging she existed. Apparently the wolf staff refused en masse. Something about the king's presence making them anxious. Fenwick's eyes slid back to Ellie with new interest. Predatory interest. The kind that made the air feel thinner. "Is that true?" he asked her directly. "Does the Alpha King make you anxious? Little human?" Ellie kept her eyes down. "I am here to serve, my lord." "That's not an answer." "It is the only answer I have." A pause. Then Fenwick's hand reached out again, this time toward her face, 2 thick fingers moving to tilt her chin upward. The touch was not violent. It was worse than violent. It was proprietary, the gesture of a man who had decided something belonged to him before asking. "Look at me when I speak to—" "Get away from her." The voice was quiet. That was the thing Ellie would remember later, in the cold of her small room above the stables, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what had happened. Not loud, not a shout, not the roar she might have expected from the most powerful shifter in the Northern Territories. Quiet. The kind of quiet that had weight. The kind that arrived before a storm, not during it. Every conversation in the hall died. All 100 guests, lords, ladies, pack commanders, advisors, wolves who answered to no one but their own alphas, turned toward the head of the table. Goblets paused mid-air. A woman in green stopped laughing mid-sound, her smile crystallizing on her face like something caught in sudden frost. Ellie looked up. She had not seen him up close before. She had seen him from across the hall when she arrived that afternoon. A distant figure at the high table, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, speaking to his advisors with the focused intensity of a man who measured every word before releasing it. She had catalogued him the way she catalogued all potential dangers, quickly, efficiently, then filed away. Now he was 6 feet from her. Caius, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, Lord of Ashenvale, commander of the 3 Wolf Alliances. He stood at the edge of the table like the hall had been arranged around him, which, Ellie supposed, it had been. He was younger than she had imagined from the stories. Not old, not gray, not the ancient iron-jawed figure the kitchen staff described when they thought no one was listening. He was perhaps 30, perhaps a little more. Dark hair, worn back simply. Eyes that caught the candlelight and gave nothing back. He was looking at Lord Fenwick. Fenwick's hand had dropped from Ellie's face the moment that voice landed. He was sitting very straight now, his wine flush receding. "My king," he said carefully. "I know what you meant." Caius did not move closer. He did not need to. "That is why I am telling you now in front of your peers, so there is no confusion later. Get away from her." The silence that followed had texture. Ellie could feel it against her skin. 100 people holding their breath, recalibrating, trying to understand what had just happened. Lords did not get corrected in front of their peers. Not here. Not at the Alpha King's own table. Fenwick rose slowly, pushing his chair back. His expression had shifted into something careful and controlled, the anger buried beneath a politician's mask. "Of course, my king." He inclined his head and moved to another seat farther down the table without another word. The conversations resumed, cautiously at first, like animals returning to a clearing after a predator passed through. The noise rebuilt itself brick by brick, but the room felt different now. Charged. Ellie was still crouching near the floor, the 2 silver goblets in her hands, when she became aware that Caius had not moved. She made herself look up. He was watching her, not with Fenwick's proprietary hunger, not with Brennan's dismissive amusement. Something else. Something she did not have a name for yet. An assessment, maybe. Or a question he had not decided whether to ask aloud. "Are you hurt?" he asked. 2 words. Direct. Low enough that only she could hear them beneath the renewed noise of the hall. Ellie blinked. In 4 years of service, she had been ignored, instructed, occasionally scolded, and once, memorably, struck across the face by a lord's wife who believed she had looked too long at her husband. She had been thanked exactly twice, both times by elderly women who likely thanked their horses as well. She had never been asked if she was hurt. "No, my king," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Thank you." He nodded once. Then he turned and walked back toward the head of the table, and the hall watched him go, and no one looked at Ellie again for the rest of the evening, which was exactly what she had always wanted. So why, she thought later, curled beneath a thin blanket with her wrist still aching and the cold pressing in through the gaps in the stable wall, did it feel like the opposite of relief? She pressed her fingers against the bruise Fenwick's rings had left. A circle of purple-green, small and precise, already darkening toward something that would last a week. "Are you hurt?" She stared at the ceiling. In the morning, she told herself, it would mean nothing. By morning, it would be another story she had no one to tell, filed beside all the other things she had survived quietly and alone. The Alpha King had corrected a lord's behavior, that was all. A matter of propriety, of order, of a king maintaining control over his court. It had nothing to do with her. She was certain of it. She was almost certain of it. Outside, the wind moved through the pines like something breathing, and the first snow of winter began to fall. Morning at Ashenvale Keep arrived without gentleness. Ellie was awake before the light, a habit carved into her by years of necessity, her body having long since learned that sleep was a luxury with an expiration time. She dressed in the dark, fingers working the laces of her serving dress by memory, her breath visible in the cold air of the small room above the stables. The straw mattress she slept on belonged to no one in particular, and smelled of horse and old wood. She had slept in worse places. She pulled her boots on, laced them tight, and went to work. The kitchens were already alive when she arrived, fire roaring in the great hearth, copper pots steaming, the head cook Marin barking instructions at 3 younger girls who moved like startled birds around her substantial frame. The smell of wood smoke and rendered fat and fresh bread filled the space with a warmth that almost made Ellie forget the cold of everything outside it. Almost. "You're late," Marin said without turning around. "I'm 4 minutes early," Ellie said. "For someone who caused a scene last night, early isn't early enough." Marin turned then, wiping her hands on her apron, her broad face set in the expression of a woman perpetually braced for disaster. She was not unkind. Ellie had learned to read the difference between Marin's scolding and genuine threat. This was the former. "Lords are already asking questions this morning. Fenwick's man came down here before sunrise wanting to know your name." Ellie stilled. "What did you tell him?" "That I didn't know it." Marin held her gaze. "Which I will continue not knowing, as long as you stay out of trouble and keep your head down. Understood?" "Understood." "Good. Take the East Corridor breakfast tray to the 3rd floor. Lord Brennan's rooms. Knock twice, leave it on the floor outside, and do not under any circumstances wait to be invited in." Ellie took the tray. The East Corridor was quieter than the main hall. Its stone walls hung with older tapestries, faded hunting scenes, wolves mid-leap against backgrounds of forest and mountain. The candles had not yet been replaced from the night before, and several had burned down to stubs, leaving long stretches of shadow between pools of guttering amber light. Ellie moved through them easily. She had learned the geography of this keep in her first week. Exits, stairwells, the rooms that locked from the inside, the ones that didn't. Knowledge like that was its own kind of armor. She was rounding the corner toward the 3rd floor landing when she heard voices. Not raised, contained, deliberate, the kind of voices that knew how to stay within walls. But something in the cadence made her slow her steps. 2 men. The words came clearer as she approached the junction of 2 corridors. "I cannot continue ignoring the petition. The Eastern Pacts have been waiting 3 months for a response." A voice she didn't recognize. Older. Careful. "The petition will be addressed when I determine the time is right." That voice she knew. Lower, certain, carrying the same weight it had carried in the hall last night when the entire room stopped breathing. Caius. Ellie stopped. She pressed herself against the wall, tray balanced carefully in both hands, and made herself invisible the way she had practiced for years. "The time, my king, is running out. Fenwick commands 7 packs in the east, after last night." A pause. Calculated. "After last night, he will not forget the public correction. Men like Fenwick carry those things. Men like Fenwick are precisely why this summit exists." A sound, boots on stone, measured pacing, His behavior last night was consistent with his behavior for the past decade. The Eastern Pacts suffer under his command and say nothing because they have no one to say it to. And that human girl is now a political instrument? Silence. Ellie's hands tightened on the tray. She is a person who was being handled against her will in my hall, Caius said. The quiet was back, that particular, weighted quiet. If that coincides with reminding Fenwick where his authority ends, then both things can be true at once. Of course, my king. The older voice had retreated into careful neutrality. I only suggest that Fenwick's allies will be watching her now. If they perceive her as significant to you in any way, she is a member of this household's staff. His voice was flat, final. She is to be treated accordingly. That is all. The sound of footsteps. Moving away, down a different corridor, growing fainter. Ellie waited until the silence was complete before she exhaled. She is a member of this household staff. She repeated it to herself as she climbed the remaining stairs to the 3rd floor. It was the correct thing. The true thing. She had assigned no other meaning to what happened last night. She was certain of that. She was simply a woman who had been caught in a lord's grip and released by a king's word, and today she would carry trays and pour wine and be invisible, and that was the full and complete shape of her life. She set Brennan's tray outside his door, knocked twice, and left. She did not see Caius again until midday. The summit had moved into its formal sessions. Long hours of men seated around a large council table in the keep's upper chamber, maps spread between them, voices rising and falling over territory boundaries and pack alliances and the distribution of resources through the coming winter. Ellie's role during these sessions was peripheral. She and 2 other serving women rotated through the room with water, wine, and food, kept to the walls, and did not exist. It was during the 3rd rotation that she became aware she was being watched. Not by Caius. He sat at the head of the council table, his attention divided between the map before him and the man currently speaking, one of the northern commanders, broad and gray-bearded, gesturing at the eastern mountain range with a thick finger. Caius listened the way a river listens to weather, completely still on the surface, moving underneath. The watching came from Caius's left. A woman, seated among the advisors, not at the main table, but in the ring of chairs set back from it. The 2nd tier, where strategists and counselors observed without participating unless called upon. She was perhaps 45, sharp-featured, with silver-streaked hair pinned severely, and eyes the particular gray of winter sky just before snow. She was watching Ellie with the focused patience of someone cataloging information. Ellie looked away, filed it. She was refilling the water vessel near the window when the gray-eyed woman appeared at her elbow. "You're the girl from last night," she said quietly, not unkindly, factually. "I am one of the serving staff," Ellie said. "Yes." The woman tilted her head slightly. "My name is Sarah. I serve as the king's head advisor. And I am going to ask you something directly, because I find directness saves time. Are you planning to stay beyond the summit's end?" Ellie looked at her carefully. "My contract runs through the winter season." That wasn't what I asked. A pause. Around them, the council session continued, voices overlapping, maps rustling. No one was paying attention to 2 women near the window. "I don't have anywhere else to go," Ellie said. Which was true, and which she had not intended to say, and which she immediately wished she hadn't. Sarah studied her for a moment. Something moved behind those gray eyes. Not pity, Ellie decided. Something more complicated than pity. "Then pay attention to who speaks to you and who watches you," Sarah said. "Not everyone in this room is here for the summit's stated purpose." She moved away before Ellie could respond, returning to her place in the 2nd-tier chairs as smoothly as if the conversation had never happened. Ellie stood by the window. Outside, The snow from last night still covered the courtyard in a clean, undisturbed white. A pair of wolves, shifted, massive, their pelts dark against the pale ground, moved in slow patrol along the keep's outer wall. Even from here she could see their breath rising in small clouds against the cold air. She thought about Sarah's words, about Fenwick's man asking her name before sunrise, about a king who spoke quietly and made a hall of wolves go still. She thought about the bruise on her wrist, now fully dark beneath her sleeve. Pay attention to who watches you. She looked back at the council table. Caius was still focused on the map. He had not glanced toward the window once. And yet somehow, standing there with cold stone against her back and the scent of pine drifting through the gap in the shutters, Ellie had the distinct and deeply inconvenient feeling that something had already begun. Something she had not chosen and could not yet name, moving beneath the surface of this place the way water moves beneath ice. Silent, present, inevitable. She tightened her grip on the water vessel and went back to work. Behind her, in the chair against the far wall, Sarah watched her go and wrote nothing down, because some observations, she had learned long ago, were too important to commit to paper before you understood what they meant. The second night of the summit brought a different kind of cold. Not the clean, pine-scented frost of open air. This was the cold that lived inside stone walls when too many people brought their tensions into a confined space. Ellie felt it the moment she entered the great hall for the evening meal. Something had shifted during the afternoon sessions. She could read it in the way the lords held their shoulders, the way conversations stopped and restarted with careful precision, the way wine disappeared faster than food. She had learned to read rooms the way some people read weather. This one was brewing. Fenwick sat in his reassigned seat farther down the table, but his eyes moved constantly, cataloging, measuring, doing the quiet arithmetic of a man recalculating his position. Beside him, two lords Ellie didn't recognize leaned together in murmured conversation. Eastern lords, she guessed from their darker wool coats trimmed with brown fur. Fenwick's allies. They had the look of men who had been told something and were deciding what to do with it. Ellie stayed close to the wall. She was carrying a fresh bread basket to the middle section of the table when she noticed the boy. He was perhaps 9 or 10, tucked against the wall near the service entrance, one of the kitchen runner children who sometimes helped move dishes between the kitchens and the hall. He was small for his age, dark-eyed, wearing an adult's apron that fell nearly to his ankles. He was holding a large pot with both arms, his face tight with the effort of it, and he was completely still because Lord Brennan had placed himself between the boy and the service entrance and was talking at him with the unhurried cruelty of someone who had nowhere else to be. Ellie couldn't hear the words from across the hall. She didn't need to. She set her bread basket down and moved. "My lord." She appeared at Brennan's elbow, positioned the way she had learned, close enough to interrupt naturally, far enough not to challenge. "I believe Cook Marin needs the pot returned urgently. There's a problem with the evening broth." She looked at the boy. "I'll take that. Go directly back to the kitchens." The boy looked at her with enormous eyes. Then he thrust the pot into her arms, heavier than she anticipated, the metal handle biting into her palms, and disappeared through the service door before Brennan could speak. Brennan turned to her. His amber eyes had the flat quality of a predator briefly interrupted. "You're the human from last night." "I am one of the serving staff, my lord. You seem to appear frequently in inconvenient places." "I follow the trays," Ellie said simply. "If you'll excuse me, the cook requires—" "Set the pot down." His voice dropped. Not a shout. A command delivered in the register of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I want to know who you are, your name, where you came from, why Fenwick's corrections seem to matter so much to our king." Ellie kept her expression neutral. The pot was very heavy. Her palms were beginning to ache. "I'm afraid I don't have answers to those questions, my lord. I am contracted kitchen staff." I arrived with the winter household rotation. I have no significance. Everyone has significance, Brennan said. The question is to whom? A long moment. Ellie held the pot and his gaze simultaneously, which required its own particular kind of balance. Then Brennan stepped aside, not warmly, not with any concession of defeat, but with the patience of a man who preferred to choose his timing. "Run along then," he said. She ran along. She found Sarah in the corridor outside the kitchens 20 minutes later, which did not entirely surprise her. The older woman was standing with a small oil lamp, examining a tapestry with the air of someone waiting to examine something else entirely. "Brennan," Ellie said, because there was no point in building toward it. "I saw." Sarah turned from the tapestry. In the low lamplight, her silver-streaked hair caught gold. "You handled it cleanly. The boy is fine. I've had him reassigned to the lower kitchens for the remainder of the summit." Sarah paused. "You moved quickly, without hesitation." "He was a child holding something too heavy with a lord blocking his exit." Ellie shifted the pot she was still somehow carrying. "It didn't require extensive consideration." Sarah looked at her steadily for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been doing that?" "Carrying pots. Moving to place yourself between a powerful person and someone they've decided to use." Her voice was not accusatory. It was precise. "How long?" Ellie said nothing. "I ask," Sarah continued, "because it is not a common skill. Most people look away. They calculate the cost of involvement and they choose their own safety. You don't appear to make that calculation." "I make the calculation," Ellie said. "I simply arrive at a different answer." Something shifted in Sarah's expression. Slight, controlled, but present. Not quite a smile. An acknowledgement, maybe, of something recognized. "Come with me," she said. "There is something you should know before tomorrow." The room Sarah led her to was small and book-lined, off the main corridor, smelling of candle wax and old parchment. A working room, maps pinned to a board, papers stacked with careful disorder, a cold hearth that suggested it was used more during the day than the night. Sarah lit 2 additional lamps and gestured to a chair. Ellie sat. "The summit ends in 4 days," Sarah began, remaining standing, which Ellie noted. "What happens in those 4 days will determine the shape of the Northern Territories for the next decade. There are 3 possible outcomes. The alliances hold, and Caius secures the Eastern Pact's formal loyalty. The alliances fracture along Fenwick's fault lines, and we spend the next several years managing a slow-burning conflict. Or..." She paused. "Someone decides that a fracture is not enough." Ellie waited. "Fenwick has been communicating with a faction outside the summit. We became aware of it 2 months ago. Letters carried by private courier. Routed through 3 different pact territories to obscure the origin. The content of those letters suggests he is not simply unhappy with last night's correction." Sarah's gray eyes were very direct. "He came here intending to destabilize the summit from within. Last night accelerated his timeline." "Because of me," Ellie said. "Because of a public moment that he experienced as humiliation. You were incidental. The mechanics of his pride were not." Sarah tilted her head. "However, and this is the part that concerns me, his man asked for your name this morning, and Brennan questioned you tonight. Which means you have become a point of focus in a situation where focus can be dangerous. What do you want me to do?" The question came out flat and practical. Sarah blinked, as if she had expected something else. Fear, perhaps, or protest. "Nothing dramatic," Sarah said. "Continue your work. Avoid isolated corridors. And if anyone approaches you who is not kitchen staff or assigned household, you come to me directly." She reached into the pocket of her coat and placed a small iron token on the desk between them. A wolf's head, simply engraved. Show this to any of the king's guard. They will bring you to me regardless of the hour." Ellie picked up the token. It was cold and heavier than it looked. She turned it once in her fingers. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment. The lamplight moved between them. "Because you didn't look away from Brennan tonight," she said finally. "And because in my experience, the people who don't look away are either very brave or very unaware of the actual danger. I need to know which one you are before I decide how much to worry about you." Ellie closed her fingers around the token. "I am aware of the danger," she said quietly. "I have always been aware of the danger. Being aware of it has never once made me look away." Sarah studied her for a long moment. Outside, the wind had picked up. It moved through the corridors of the keep with a low sound, almost vocal, pressing at the window shutters and finding the gaps. "Get some sleep," Sarah said at last. "Tomorrow will be longer than today." Ellie stood, slipped the token into her pocket, and left. She did not sleep for a very long time. She lay on her thin mattress above the stables, listening to the wind and turning over everything Sarah had told her, the letters, the faction, the 4 days, the dangerous geometry of lords and kings and fracture points she had somehow landed in the middle of without ever intending to be anywhere at all. She pressed the iron token between her palms, cold, then slowly warming. Somewhere in the keep above her, she knew, 100 wolves were sleeping or pretending to sleep, dreaming or scheming. And at the head of it all was a man who had spoken 2 quiet words in a crowded hall and asked her if she was hurt. She had told him no. She wondered for the first time if that had been the truth. The 3rd day of the summit arrived with the smell of coming snow. Ellie recognized it before she opened her eyes. That particular sharpness in the air, dry and metallic, the way the world held its breath just before the sky released something heavy. She had grown up reading weather, the way other children read stories. When you lived in a place where a late storm could mean a frozen well and empty shelves, the sky became something you learned to listen to. She dressed quickly, tucked the iron token into the inner pocket of her dress where it sat against her ribs, and went down to the kitchens. Marin was already in a state. 3 lords want separate breakfast trays before the morning session. Lord Fenwick has sent word he will not eat from a communal kitchen service. He wants food prepared and tasted by his own man before it reaches him. She turned from the fire with an expression that suggested she had opinions about this she was professionally suppressing. "Which means we are short 2 runners, and I need you on the upper floor rotation." "The upper floor," Ellie repeated carefully. "Council antechamber. The king takes his morning meal there before sessions begin. You'll share the rotation with Dora." Marin thrust a tray into her hands. Bread, soft cheese, dried fruit, a small pot of honey, a cup of dark tea already steaming. "Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't linger. In and out." Ellie took the tray. The upper floor was a different country from the kitchens. The stone here was older, the walls thicker, the tapestries replaced by something more austere. No hunting scenes, no decorative excess. Simple geometric patterns in dark thread, the kind of work that suggested utility over display. The corridor smelled of beeswax and cold stone, and faintly, underneath, wood smoke from a fire already burning somewhere ahead. The antechamber door was open. Ellie entered quietly. The room was smaller than she had expected, a working space, not a ceremonial one. A writing desk covered in papers, a low table near the fire, a single window overlooking the courtyard below, where the morning snow was just beginning to fall in slow, deliberate flakes. The fire was good. A real fire, not a courtesy fire, burning with the specific enthusiasm of something recently and carefully built. Caius was standing at the window. He was not in formal dress. That was the first thing she registered, because it changed the architecture of the room. No heavy coat, no ceremonial details. A plain dark shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow despite the cold. Dark trousers, boots worn enough to be comfortable. His hair was loose rather than pulled back, which made him look younger and somehow more serious at the same time. Stripped of the visual glamour of authority, the authority itself became more visible, carried entirely in the way he stood, the way he occupied space. He turned when she entered. "The morning tray," she said, because the silence required filling. She moved to the low table and set it down with practiced efficiency, arranging it without looking at him. Bread to the left, honey forward, tea where a hand could reach it easily. "Thank you." He said it simply. The same directness as 2 nights ago, carrying no expectation of response. She should have left. She was straightening to leave when his voice came again, not stopping her exactly, but landing in the space between her and the door. "You were up before the kitchen fires this morning." She stilled, turned slowly. "My lord?" He was looking at her with that same quality of attention she had noticed in the hall. Complete, unhurried, neither warm nor cold. "I walk the outer wall before dawn. I saw you cross the courtyard from the stables to the kitchen entrance." He paused. "The stables. That's where they've housed you?" Ellie kept her expression level. "The room above them, yes. It's adequate." Something moved through his face, brief, controlled. "This keep has 40 unused guest chambers. I am serving staff, my king. The stables room is appropriate to my position." He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the window, the snow was thickening, flakes moving sideways now as the wind shifted. "What is your name?" he asked. She had been asked that question twice in 3 days, by men who wanted different things from the answer. She understood that the question itself was not neutral. A name given was a thread handed over. It could be used to pull you toward something or to tie you in place. But this felt different. She didn't entirely understand why. "Ellie," she said. He nodded once, turned back to the window. "The snow will be heavy by evening, Ellie. Tell the kitchen staff to prepare for the possibility that the outer gates will need to stay closed through tomorrow morning." It was a practical instruction, an entirely reasonable thing for a man running a large keep to communicate through available staff. There was nothing in it that should have lodged in her chest like a small, warm coal. She told herself that firmly as she walked back down the corridor. The morning session was already tense when she arrived to begin the antechamber rotation. She could hear it through the heavy door of the council chamber, voices overlapping with the particular jagged quality of men who had stopped being diplomatic. She caught fragments. Eastern boundary. Prior agreements. The petition was clear. And then Fenwick's voice, smoother than she expected given the tension, carrying the practiced ease of someone who had been building to something for a long time. "I simply suggest, my king, that certain distractions may be affecting the clarity of this summit's purpose." A silence. Then Caius's voice, quiet as always, carrying through the door with no effort at all. "Speak plainly, Fenwick. The presence of humans in sensitive household positions creates vulnerabilities. Humans have no pack loyalty, no binding, nothing that ensures their discretion or their allegiance." Ellie was standing completely still outside the door with a water vessel in her hands. "You are suggesting," Caius said, "that a serving woman with no access to council sessions poses a security risk to this summit." A careful pause. "I am suggesting that unusual attention paid to such a person by the king himself creates questions among the assembled lords that affect the summit's cohesion. That is all." The silence that followed was long enough that Ellie counted her own heartbeats. 7, 8, 9. "This summit's cohesion," Caius said finally, "is affected by lords who mistake a correction of their behavior for an invitation to audit mine. We will continue." "Lord Harwick, the northern boundary question." Fenwick said nothing more. Ellie exhaled and moved away from the door. She found the letter that afternoon. She had gone to her room above the stables to retrieve an extra shawl. The cold had settled seriously into the keep by midday, the snow outside now a steady curtain of gray and white. The room was as she had left it, her few possessions arranged with the particular order of someone who owned little enough that arrangement was easy. Except for the folded paper on her mattress. She stared at it for a moment before touching it. Then she unfolded it carefully, holding it toward the small window's gray light. The handwriting was precise and unhurried. Confident. You are not as invisible as you believe. Neither is the interest you have attracted. There are those at this summit who would use your position here against the king, and those who would use it against you. Leave before the summit ends. This is not a threat. It is the only honest advice you will receive in this building. No signature. Ellie read it twice. Then she folded it and pressed it flat against her palm, thinking. She thought about Sarah's words. Someone decides a fracture is not enough. She thought about Brennan's amber eyes cataloging her across the hall. She thought about Fenwick suggesting her presence was a vulnerability, his voice smooth with something that had the shape of concern and the texture of calculation. She thought about a man standing at a window in a plain dark shirt watching snowfall, asking her name like it was something he wanted to know, rather than something he intended to use. She put the letter in her pocket beside the iron token. Then she made a decision. Not the careful, calculated, survival-oriented decision she had been trained by years of difficult living to make, but a different kind. The kind that came from somewhere below reason, from the part of her that had never quite learned to look away. She went to find Sarah. She was halfway across the courtyard, snow collecting on her shawl, and the cold biting through her worn boots when she saw him. Fenwick. He was standing at the far edge of the courtyard near the stables, speaking to a man she didn't recognize. Tall, hooded against the snow, the conversation fast and low. Fenwick's back was to her. The hooded man was not. He saw her. Even across the courtyard, through the curtain of falling snow. She felt the moment his gaze found her and locked. A specific quality of attention, focused and assessing, entirely too deliberate for a stranger encountering a serving woman by accident. She walked steadily to the keep's inner door and did not run. But her hand was around the iron token before she reached it, and she did not let go until she was inside. Sarah listened without interrupting. That was something Ellie had noticed about her. Where most people filled silences with the sound of their own thinking, Sarah let information arrive completely before she responded. She sat across the small book-lined room with her hands folded and her gray eyes steady, while Ellie placed the letter on the desk between them, described the hooded man in the courtyard, and relayed word for word what she had heard through the council chamber door. When Ellie finished, the room was quiet, except for the snow pressing against the shutters. Sarah picked up the letter, read it once, set it down. The hooded man, she said. Height, build, anything distinctive about the way he stood. Taller than Fenwick by half a head. The hood was deep. I couldn't see his face, but his hands were bare. Ellie paused. His left hand had a scar across the knuckles. Old scar, wide. The kind that comes from a blade, not an accident. Sarah's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. You noticed his hands from across a courtyard in heavy snow. I noticed the things that might matter later. Yes. Sarah folded the letter and placed it inside her coat. You do. She rose and moved to the door, then stopped with her hand on the frame. Stay inside the keep for the remainder of the day. Use only the main corridors. If Marin assigns you any outdoor work, tell her you have a rotation conflict and come to me. She looked back over her shoulder. And Ellie, say nothing of this to anyone else. Not Marin. Not the other staff. No one. Who is he? Ellie asked. The hooded man. A pause. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. The first crack in her controlled surface that Ellie had observed. Someone who should not be within 40 miles of this keep. She left before Ellie could ask anything further. The afternoon deepened into early dark, the way winter afternoons did, not gradually but suddenly, the light simply deciding it had given enough. Ellie kept to the main corridors. She carried trays, refilled water vessels, exchanged the burned-down candles in the upper hallway for fresh ones, and watched. She watched Fenwick's table during the early evening meal, the way his two Eastern lords leaned toward him, the way he himself was unusually still, the performance of a man conserving energy for something. She watched Brennan, who sat apart from Fenwick tonight, eating alone with the focused isolation of someone who had recently made a calculation and was letting it settle. She watched the doors. She did not see the hooded man anywhere inside the keep, which was, she understood, not the same as him not being there. She was collecting empty cups from a side table near the hall's eastern wall when she became aware of a presence at her left. Not threatening. The opposite, in fact, which was almost more startling. The particular gravity of a person who had decided to stand near her without need or agenda. She turned. Caius was not looking at her. He was looking across the hall, a cup of wine in his hand, his expression carrying the surface calm of someone whose thoughts were running considerably faster beneath it. He had the stance of a man who had stopped at this particular spot for an entirely unremarkable reason and would leave in a moment. "The woman in the blue shawl 3 tables down," he said quietly, not moving his gaze. "She has been watching you for the past half hour." Ellie did not look immediately. She gathered another cup, moved it to her tray. Then, naturally, her eyes swept the room and found the woman. Middle-aged, compact, wearing the dark dress of a senior household attendant from a visiting pack. She was looking at Ellie with the same deliberate quality as the hooded man in the courtyard. Not casual, not incidental. "I see her," Ellie said. "She arrived with Lord Crest's party from the Southeastern Territory, but she has not performed any function consistent with Lord Crest's household needs since arriving." He took a slow sip of wine. "Sarah has been notified." Ellie's hand stilled on the tray. "You know about Sarah's—" "Sarah reports to me," he said simply. A pause. "She told me about the letter, and the man in the courtyard." Ellie absorbed this. Outside the hall's high windows, the snow was still falling, the sound of it a constant low pressure against the stone. She thought about the iron token against her ribs, given by Sarah as a connection to the King's Guard. She thought about how little of what happened in this keep was actually incidental. "You should know," Caius said, still not looking at her, his voice pitched for her alone beneath the noise of the hall, "that Fenwick's petition, the grievance he brought to this summit, is legitimate. His eastern packs are genuinely overtaxed and under-supported. I intend to address it." A brief pause. "What is not legitimate is the method he chose when he decided the summit's pace was too slow for his purposes." "The hooded man," Ellie said. "His name is Davin. He was, a member of a dissolved pack from the northern reaches. Dissolved because they were found to be operating outside pack law, moving between territories without sanction, carrying out work for whoever paid the most." His voice remained level. "Fenwick paid." Ellie turned this over carefully. "He brought an assassin to the summit." "He brought leverage," Caius said. "The distinction matters because it tells us what he wants. If he wanted blood, he would have moved already. He wants concession. He wants the summit to fracture in a specific direction that benefits his position. And he intends to use—" He stopped. His jaw tightened slightly, a controlled movement. "He intends to use any available instrument to accomplish that." The word instrument sat between them for a moment. "I heard what he said in the council session," Ellie said, "about vulnerabilities, about distractions." Something shifted in Caius's expression, brief, genuine, and gone quickly. Not anger exactly. Something more internal than anger. "I know. I don't want to be something that gives him a lever." She kept her voice level, practical, the way she kept her hand steady on heavy trays. "If my being here creates a complication for you, I can leave at first light. I have managed without a winter contract before." The silence that followed was different from the others. Denser somehow. Caius turned his head and looked at her directly for the first time since he'd arrived at her elbow. In the amber light of the hall, his eyes were very dark. "You came to this keep because you needed work, and it was winter," he said. "You have done nothing wrong. You have, in fact, done several things quietly right." He paused. "I don't send people away because powerful men have decided to use them as complications." Ellie looked at him. "That is either very principled or very impractical." "Usually both," he said. And something in his face moved. The smallest shift, barely a change at all, but it altered the entire quality of the moment. Not a smile exactly, but the shape a smile makes in the second before it decides to happen. Then it was gone, and he was looking across the hall again. "Stay close to the main corridors tonight," he said. "Sarah's people are in position. By morning, we will have a clearer picture of Davin's location and intent." He set his empty cup on her tray with the natural ease of a man who had decided it belonged there. "Eat something before the kitchens close, Ellie. You have been on your feet since before dawn." He walked away. She stood holding the tray. Around her, the hall continued its noise. Laughter, argument, the scrape of chairs. 100 wolves eating and drinking and negotiating the invisible architecture of power. None of them had noticed the exchange. Why would they? A king setting down a cup. A serving woman collecting it. Nothing of note. Ellie pressed her fingers briefly against the iron token through the fabric of her dress. Then she moved toward the kitchens, not because she was hungry, though she was, genuinely, in the deep, persistent way of someone who had learned to ignore it, but because a man had noticed that she hadn't eaten and said so plainly, without performance, and she didn't entirely know what to do with that, except to let it be true. She was nearly at the service door when Brennan stepped from the shadow of the side corridor. He was alone. His amber eyes were very clear, not wine-hazed, not casual. Whatever calculation he had been running since the previous evening had apparently resolved. "I'll be brief," he said quietly. "I am not Fenwick's man. I want that understood before anything else." Ellie held the tray between them. "Understood. Fenwick is going to move tonight." His voice was low and rapid. "I don't know the specifics, but the woman in the blue shawl, she left the hall 10 minutes ago, and Davin was seen near the east stable entrance an hour past." He paused. "I have no loyalty to a man who brings hired wolves to a peace summit. I do have some interest in this summit not ending in disaster." His jaw tightened. "Tell Sarah. Tell the king. Tell whoever will listen fastest." He turned and walked back into the shadow of the corridor before she could respond. Ellie stood still for exactly one breath. Then she dropped the tray, the clean ring of metal on stone cutting through the hall's noise like a bell, and ran. She found Sarah in the upper corridor before she found anyone else. The older woman took one look at Ellie's face and moved. No questions, no hesitation. The practiced efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Within minutes, the King's Guard was in motion, quiet and fast, spreading through the keep's corridors like water finding cracks in stone. No alarm raised, no torches lit in dramatic procession. Just men and women who knew their work, moving through shadow with the focused calm of people who had prepared for this. Ellie stayed with Sarah. She told herself it was because Sarah had instructed her to stay close. She told herself it was practical. She was in the corridor outside the council antechamber, her back against the cold stone wall, when the door at the far end opened and Davin walked through it. He was not hooded now. He was a lean man, angular-faced, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to move through spaces without displacing the air. He carried nothing visible. He did not need to. A wolf of his background carried enough. His eyes swept the corridor and found Ellie immediately. the way they had found her across the courtyard, through heavy snow, and she understood in that moment that she had not been incidental to Fenwick's plan at all. She had been the destination, not to harm her. Brennan had been right about that. This was leverage, not blood. A human woman connected, however tenuously, to the king's attention. A thread to pull publicly, loudly, in a way that would force Caius to either respond and confirm Fenwick's narrative of distraction, or not respond and demonstrate a vulnerability Fenwick could use differently. Either way, Fenwick won something. Davin took 3 steps toward her. Then Caius came through the door behind him. He moved without sound for a man his size, which Ellie registered distantly as remarkable. He crossed the corridor in 4 strides and placed himself between her and Davin with the simple, total completeness of a wall being built. Not a performance. Not theater for the assembled keep. There was no one else in the corridor except Sarah, who had gone very still at Ellie's side. Just 3 people in a cold stone hallway with 1 candle burning. Davin stopped. "This is not what Fenwick told you it was," Caius said. His voice was quiet, as always. "Whatever he promised you for this, he cannot deliver. His position after tonight will not allow it." Davin was silent for a moment. His eyes moved once to Ellie, then back to Caius. Something worked in his jaw. "The woman is unharmed," he said at last. "Not a confession, a clarification." "I know." Caius held his gaze. "Walk out of this keep. Leave the territory before dawn. I will not pursue a man who chooses to remove himself from a situation he was misled into." A pause. "But I will not offer that twice." Another silence. Longer. Then Davin stepped back. Once. Twice. The careful, measured retreat of a man recalculating everything. And then he turned and moved through the far corridor door and was gone. Sarah exhaled beside Ellie. A small sound, controlled, carrying 3 days of accumulated tension in the single release of breath. Caius turned. His eyes went to Ellie first, with that same directness she had come to recognize. Not possessive, not performative, simply present. A man checking that something important was intact. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The same words, the same quiet register, the same absence of expectation in them. Ellie felt something shift in her chest. Not dramatically, not with the force of a revelation. Gently, the way ice shifts in early spring when the temperature changes so gradually, you don't notice until the shape of everything is different. "No," she said. Then, before the word could stand alone as it had 3 nights ago, "Thank you." He nodded. His gaze moved to Sarah. "Fenwick." "Already in custody," Sarah said. "His eastern lords are processing the situation. Lord Brennan has offered testimony." She paused. "The summit will hold." Something in Caius's shoulders released, barely visible, but present. The weight of days of management and calculation and controlled patience settling differently now that the structure beneath it had held. He looked back at Ellie. "Brennan warned you," he said. "He did." "Why did he tell you rather than coming directly to the guard?" Ellie considered this honestly. "I think he didn't fully trust anyone here except someone who had already demonstrated they had no political interest in any outcome." She paused. "I was the only person in this keep who wanted nothing." Caius looked at her for a long moment. "That is either very humble or very inaccurate," he said quietly. Ellie blinked. And there it was again. That almost smile, brief and genuine, there and gone. But this time, it stayed a fraction of a second longer than before. Fenwick was escorted from Ashenvale Keep the following morning under gray winter sky, his political position in ruins, his eastern petition transferred to direct crown oversight. His allied lords signed revised agreements before the summit closed. The eastern pax, Sarah told Ellie later, would receive a crown representative within the month, someone to hear their legitimate grievances without Fenwick filtering them through his own ambition. Davin was never found. But he was never heard from again either, which amounted to the same thing. The summit concluded on its 4th day with the alliances intact. On the morning the last of the lords departed, Ellie packed her few possessions into the worn leather bag she had arrived with. The iron token she placed on the small table beside the straw mattress. Her contract was complete, her debt of service discharged, and the token belonged to a world she was preparing to step back out of. She was lacing her boots when Sarah appeared in the doorway. "You're leaving," Sarah said. "My contract ended yesterday." "Yes." Sarah leaned against the doorframe. "I am here to offer you another one." She let that sit for a moment. The king's household requires a permanent staff coordinator, someone to manage the rotating service staff, liaise with visiting households, ensure that the kind of situation we experience this week does not recur through simple inattention. She paused. It is a real position with real responsibilities. It has nothing to do with what happened in this corridor last night. Ellie looked at her steadily. "Does the king know you're offering this?" "He suggested it," Sarah said simply. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the snow had stopped overnight, and the courtyard below lay in clean, unbroken white, the kind of stillness that came after long weather, when the world had finished saying something difficult and was waiting to hear the response. Ellie looked at the iron token on the table. Then she picked it up and put it back in her pocket. "I'll need a room," she said. "A proper one." Sarah's mouth curved. A real smile this time, unhurried and genuine. "There are 40 unused guest chambers," she said. She saw Caius that afternoon in the outer courtyard, where he was speaking with 2 of his commanders about the road conditions south. He glanced over when she crossed the courtyard. A brief, natural glance, the kind that happened when movement entered peripheral vision. Then he looked again, slightly longer, a question in it, and something that was not quite a question. Something quieter and more patient than that. She met his eyes across the courtyard and gave him a small, honest nod. He returned it. Then he turned back to his commanders and continued the conversation. It was not a grand moment. There was no declaration, no dramatic gesture, no promise spoken aloud. Just 2 people in a cold courtyard after a difficult week, acknowledging something that had begun without either of them planning it and had survived everything that had been thrown at it, including their own considerable efforts to dismiss it as nothing. It was, Ellie thought, exactly the right size for what it actually was. Something beginning. Something real. Something that would require time and honesty and the willingness to keep choosing it. The way she had kept choosing not to look away. Not because it was easy, but because some things were worth the cost of seeing them clearly. She crossed the courtyard. The snow crunched under her boots, clean and cold. The pines along the keep's outer wall smelled sharp and alive. Somewhere above the gray sky the sun was moving, and the days, almost imperceptibly, were beginning to get longer. She had work to do. She went inside to do it. Fenwick stood trial before the Crown Council 3 months later and was stripped of his pack lordship. The Eastern Territories were reorganized under direct Crown stewardship, and the 7 packs he had controlled for a decade sent representatives to Ashenvale for the first time in living memory. Brennan, to his own evident surprise, was appointed as interim Eastern liaison, a role that suited his talent for calculation and gave it, for once, something honest to work on. Sarah continued as head advisor, continued being right about most things, and continued pretending this did not occasionally frustrate everyone around her. Marin never did learn Ellie's surname. She decided, after some consideration, that she had never needed it. And in the great keep of Ashenvale, through the long remainder of that winter and into the slow arrival of spring, 2 people moved through the same corridors and shared the same fires and spoke to each other with the particular honesty of those who have already seen each other clearly under difficult conditions, which is the only foundation worth building anything on. The snow melted. The work continued. It was enough.